So here's how it worked. The Prime Minister wanted to be able to claim that he was borrowing all this money on the cheap. He loved to stand in the House and say that his debt wasn't costing any money because interest rates were so low. Well, the only reason he could borrow for next to nothing is because his central bank was creating the cash out of thin air. If it had been real lenders, they would have demanded a real rate of return on their loans. So what happened is they created something called quantitative easing. Whenever they invent new incomprehensible terminology, Mr. Speaker, you can be sure that there's something sinister behind it. And here's how it works. Very simple. The government sells bonds to lenders. Bank of Canada buys back those bonds at a higher price. The lenders love it. That's why the banks thoroughly endorse this strategy, because they made the money on the difference. Simple arbitrage. The government sells them something on a Monday and buys it back for them at a higher price on a Wednesday. Who wouldn't go for that deal? Well, unfortunately, only about 100 financial institutions are eligible to participate in it. The rest of the ordinary, hardworking Canadians who pay for it are not. But the banks and the insurance companies and other financial institutions profited off of this transaction. Now, the Bank of Canada pays for those bonds by depositing money in the accounts of those large financial institutions held on reserve at the Bank of Canada. And so those reserves skyrocketed over the last 2 years, and as the bank bought up to $400 billion of new debt. And what happened? That exploded the money supply, and more dollars chasing fewer goods reached higher prices. Much of the money then funneled into the financial system and was lent out in mortgages to wealthy investors who saw a massive expansion in the number of real estate holdings they could accumulate. Thus, housing prices went up 50% in 2 years, creating the biggest housing bubble in Canadian history. And now that the central bank is forced to raise interest rates, it risks bursting that bubble. And all the people that got on the balloon when it was on the ground floor and it went up into the sky now risk coming crashing down as that balloon is bursting. And worse than that, the Bank of Canada now has hundreds of billions of dollars of deposits that it made into the accounts that it has on its reserves of those large financial institutions. Well, what's happened to those deposits? They now bear more interest because interest rates have gone up. So the wealthy bankers that participated in this arbitrage transaction at the beginning and were paid for it by having more money deposited into their accounts at the Bank of Canada now collect 3.75% because that is the policy rate that the bank pays. Now, what does that mean? That the central bank is now losing money for the first time in its history, and Canadian taxpayers are forced to bail them out to a tune of $4 billion every year. This entire wretched scheme, of which I warned 2 years ago, will maybe in the end amount to the single biggest wealth transfer from working class people to ultra wealthy insiders, from the have-nots to the have-yachts at any time in our history.